On this channel, $1 Million Made Easy, we love to run numbers for people. What we do is look at what the S&P 500 has done for the last 100 years and look to see what it might do for you in the future. And what we do is use spreadsheets, and what we do is run numbers for people. If you just ask in the comment section, we'll run your numbers. And not only will the numbers help you, they will help others that see that others are in the same condition you're in. But what I want to do is I got an interesting request, and it came in like this. Here's an unusual one. If I wanted to retire at 28, how much would I need it invested, assuming $60,000 in annual expenses? Okay, 28 years old, you say nobody can do that. Well, let's just run some numbers hypothetically. 6,000 or 60,000 in annual expenses would be 5,000 a month. What we want to do is allow for 3% inflation, because a 28-year-old is going to have to plan on a lot of inflation over his lifetime. So we want to just run some numbers to see where in the world, how much money would you need to have that kind of uh, be able to retire on 60,000 a year. I'm just going to start with, and this is just a wild guess. I didn't run these numbers ahead of time. Let's just say you have 1.5 million, and also you wouldn't leave it all on the S&P 500. So let's do a 70-30 split. We've seen in other videos that that's a pretty good split, either 60-40 or 70-30, meaning 70% is going to stay in the S&P 500 and 30% is going to go in a cash reserve account. So when the market's going down, you're taking the money, this 69,000, for example, out of the cash reserve as opposed to taking it out of the S&P 500, because you want that to always be there to continue to grow for when the market does come back, which it inevitably does. So let's look at the 1924. Looks like you'd have no problem 30 years out. It'd be growing. These are the numbers for 1924 in this summary box here. 1925, you're still in the 7 millions. Well, we're going to look at 1929, and then you're running out of money. So what in the world would it take to make sure, in case we did run into a downtime like this, let's just change this to 2 million. Again, I'm just doing this on the fly because I have no idea. 28-year-old, that's really hard to fathom, retiring and have a lifetime ahead of you and trying to make your money last. Here in 1929, it looks like, see the summary box for 1929? Yeah, it's not running out of money, but would you feel comfortable after 30 years? Remember, he's 28. After 30 years, taking out 5,000 a month, increasing up by 3% a year. You can see the yearly inflated going down through here. He's starting out at 60,000. 20 years into, he's need 105,000. So I'm not sure if I'm comfortable that this would keep going. It's hard to say because I usually don't run it for more than 30 years. How about we saw in 1924 we were up to, it was jumping big time. Let's see. Well, let's stay with 1929. How about 2.5 million? Again, this is such an unusual request. It looks like 2.5 million with this scenario, 60,000 a year, increasing that by 3% to keep up with inflation. Looks like it's growing big time. By the time you get to 30 years, it's up to 8 million you have left. Again, this is such an unusual request. I just thought I'd run the numbers just to see where a person might be. So if you're 28 years old and have $2.5 million and want to 5,000 a month or 60,000 a year and increase that by 3% to keep up with inflation, it looks like you might be okay. And this is in the worst case scenario. I want to go ahead and update this for every single year. I want to prepare people for the worst case scenario, especially if they're planning on retiring at 28 and have a lifetime ahead of them. In most cases, you're going to be just fine. Let me look at the actual graph here. Okay, you're starting with 2 million. 1929 is the low spot here. We just saw that was, what was that again? After 30 years, my graph shows after 20 years. So after 20 years, you have 2 million. Here's the graph after 20 years for every other scenario. 1924, you'd have over 5 million. Look at some of these, 20 million, 25 million, 30 million. So 100% of the time, you'd have money left after 20 years. And we saw right here, after 30 years, it'd be growing even in 1929, the worst case scenario. Let me do one other thing. What I've also allowed for, what if we have a really down period, extended period, which you're 28 years old. What if we had another 1929 period? And we had the down years from 1929 to 1938, and then we had another decade like in 1929's. Then in this case, you would run out of money in less than 30 years, given that scenario. Again, that's a worst case black swan event where you'd have depression after depression after depression type returns for like decades. Then you'd be running out of money. But again, if we don't do that, if we just do historically what's speaking, we'd be fine. After 30 years, it'd be growing. In 25 years, it'd be less than 4 million and be up to over 8 million 30 years later. So it's on a growth spurt. That's even in the worst case scenario. And all these other numbers, they're just, if you look over here in the 30-year column, they're just blowing them out of. There's a 1929 number, 8.684, but every other scenario, tens of millions of dollars, starting with 2,500,000. So this was a hypothetical case. Somebody wanted to run it, so I did it. Again, that's what we do on this channel, run numbers. We use lots of different spreadsheets. We look at what the returns have done by decade, and we project ahead some kind of a range depending on what kind of scenario we have in the coming years, whether we have down decades like the 1930s or the 2000s, or we have positive ones like the 1980s and 1990s. If we can look at these over the long term, over 3 and 4 decades, you can get a pretty good handle on what might happen in the future. Again, that's just what we do on this channel, $1,000,000 Made Easy. I love running numbers for people. Please consider subscribing. Please tell your friends about this channel and all these spreadsheets that they can utilize in their financial planning. And thanks for watching.